While over 7 million Ukrainians have become internally displaced since the start of the war on February 24th, more than 5 million have fled the country, generating Europe's fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War. With as many as 90% of those fleeing refugees, women and children, international organizations and rights groups have warned of the growing risk of sexual violence and human trafficking. For more, Ilias Chatzis joins us for Perspective. He's the head of the Human Trafficking and Migrant Smuggling section at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Ilias Chatzis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So how much does your organization know thus far about trafficking or other criminal networks targeting Ukrainian refugees?
First of all, let me start by saying that we know that trafficking is related to war and that the war feeds this crime. We've seen it elsewhere. We've seen it in other conflicts around the world. And it in a way, it makes sense. People are forced to flee their homes, their lives. They live with, a bag in one hand and a child in another. And they're left, without any means of support. At this stage, we know that, as you said, we have the fastest growing refugee population. We are concerned because the majority of them are women and children. The men have to stay behind and fight. And that means that this is a population that is particularly vulnerable because of these specific characteristics. We rarely have this type of one gender, if you like, refugee populations fleeing conflict. What we are concerned about is what you actually said, is sexual exploitation, but it's also possibly forced labor, domestic exploitation. So this is what we're looking out for.
Now, the quickly growing refugee flows, especially in Poland, I think this is something that's probably new, you correct me if I'm wrong about this crisis, led to an influx of ad hoc assistance, volunteers from all over the world flocking, not necessarily with any particular AIDS organization, to help with the crisis. Do you think that this made it easier for traffickers to operate, in the sense that at the beginning it wasn't always necessarily clear who was officially working for an aid organization and who wasn't?
This is a problem that, again, we see in a lot of conflicts because it's normal. There's chaos usually when you have so many people arriving at your doorstep in a way and in your country. But I think the confusion of the first days has been, there have been a lot of efforts to address these concerns. And we have to admit that the European Union and other countries have also done their utmost to address the needs, both within the countries, but also as a group of countries. Access to education, access to social security, access to work, sheltering and covering the basic provisions are among those that are needed. And this time, I think the countries acted at the right time with the right measures. Of course, the numbers create their own challenges, and that's where we have to be, very careful. I know that there's a lot of efforts to coordinate the assistance that is offered by volunteers to these refugees, to make sure that those that have bad intentions are kept out. And, volunteering is a very noble thing, and, everybody's encouraged to do it, but there needs to be really close coordination with the authorities and the agencies that are doing their best to support the efforts to support the refugees have to do that in very close coordination with the authorities. So that's the best way to address this potential gap.
So speaking of the best ways to address what's happening more generally, what is the short and long-term strategy then for your organization in terms of preventing trafficking of Ukrainian refugees?
The first one is first to coordinate among ourselves. We have different agencies covering different parts of the situation, different aspects, of the situation. You have the refugee agency, you have the migration office, IOM, you have us, you have UNICEF. So one of the most important things that we put our heads together and we put our efforts together to see how best we can address it. We have different task forces at different levels to look what's going on within Ukraine, to exchange information, to what's going on outside Ukraine. And of course, a number of them are focused on trafficking in persons, and we're co-leading some of them. So the first thing is for ourselves to get a better idea of what the situation is, and then to work with the countries that are receiving these populations to offer our assistance. And we have very close cooperation with the European Union and its agencies. We have close cooperation with the bordering countries of Ukraine. We have also with countries further behind, like further away from the border, as well as, for example, with Moldova.
Have you faced any challenges or barriers in terms of coordinating all of the different actors that are necessary in fighting human trafficking?
There's a lot of coordination efforts, and there's a lot of challenges to make sure that the coordination doesn't create an additional hurdle of creating more needs for coordination. But I think everybody's doing their best at this stage. Everybody has been very forthcoming. We are talking to the police units that are covering trafficking persons. At this stage, the information that we have is that there are a number of ongoing investigations. We don't have like a concrete trafficking case that is tied to the war in Ukraine, at least to my knowledge, until today. But there are, as I said, a number of investigations which may lead to that. The NGOs are very worried. We're also talking to the civil society. They have their ears on the ground. They see things that maybe the authorities do not see. They see it first. So we're talking to them as well, and we are the channel of feeding this information to the authorities. We just had last week a meeting of more than, I think it was about 100 NGOs that participated in a call on their impressions of the situation on the ground.
Now, as you mentioned, your work obviously requires cooperation with national governments who are responsible for kind of ensuring safety and security on their own territory. Have EU countries, have their measures aimed at welcoming and integrating Ukrainian refugees been enough, do you think, to reduce the trafficking risks?
I wouldn't like to comment on whether it's enough, because the situation is evolving so fast that what is enough today may not be enough tomorrow. But what I said at the beginning, I think is very important, that the measure to have access, to initiate the humanitarian directive from the European Union side has been a very crucial point, because it diffused a little bit the situation in the borders. Imagine if the borders were closed and these people you were queuing up on the other side of the borders with bombs falling behind them. It would have been a horrible situation. So I think that the European Union and Moldova, who is also bordering Ukraine, has opened its borders as well, have done the right thing at the right moment. And I think they are reevaluating, and correctly so, their measures almost on a daily basis on what needs to be done.
As a last question, Ilias Chatzis, I'd just like to change gears very quickly to talk about the crisis in the Mediterranean. According to UN figures, deaths at sea on migrant routes to Europe are doubling year on year. In 2021 alone, over 3,000 people died or went missing attempting to cross the Mediterranean or the Atlantic. The criminalization, of course, of search and rescue missions obviously hasn't helped. Has this issue fallen by the wayside, do you think?
I hope not on our radar screen. I mean, we try to deal with multiple crises at one time, and you have to remember also there's also, for example, the crisis that has been created by the takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan and the potential flows from there. You have sub-Saharan Africa, so we try not to lose sight of the fact that there are multiple centers of conflict around the world, and we keep an eye on the situation. From our side, we are also looking at the situation in the Mediterranean. We have established a network of, if you like, data collection points where we try to figure out how the flows are changing. And we need to see also what will be the impact of the war in Ukraine in these flows, because let's not ignore the fact that the war is leading to a heavy increase in prices of food and fuel, and this will make a lot of people desperate in countries where buying food and procuring fuel is basically absorbs like almost 100% of the monthly income. So this rise in fuel would create maybe more desperate situations.
And hopefully the double standards applied to refugees coming from elsewhere will gradually be removed. Ilias Chatzis, thank you so much for coming on the show today.